You're now listening to the Something Good Podcast Network. Please press any key to continue.
A kiss, as defined by Dan Webster, is something pleasing, a caress, a gentle touch. But there's another kiss that isn't in Webster's.
Hey world, we're Kiss!
Some critics say they don't make music, they just make noise.
Yeah, Kiss sucks!
Kiss implies the extreme in the theatrics on stage, utilizing fire and smoke and bizarre costumes, and the ever-consistent, constant concealment of their true identities.
Speaking of which, Kiss is going to have its own comic book soon.
Take Kiss with you. It's fun. Show your friends and be the first. Now.
Oh my God, no time to turn!
And welcome once again to No Time to Turn, a Kiss Nerd podcast.
Nerds.
We are not experts. We do not claim to know it all. We're just like sifting through this stuff and learning stuff and talking about it. And anyone that has been with us this whole ride, I think they figured that out by now. I wonder how many people are sitting there going, "Well, that's not the way I heard it."
Well, I think of any episode, this is going to be the one where most people are going to be like, well, that's not the way I heard it.
Well, that's why we brought notes this time.
Yeah, and you never know that's what we're trying to do, is kind of sift through this stuff and figure out what's fact, what's fiction, and sometimes the myth is better than the reality. It's better to not know. That's part of what makes Kiss. That's part of the charm of Kiss, especially in this era, is that there's so much you don't know, and you're having to fill in with your own. It's what you bring into it with you, and that's what made it fun. Now we're kind of looking at it from hindsight, and it's almost like it's hard not to look at it through some sort of cynicism or whatever, and it takes kind of some of the fun out of it and being present in the moment. But, you can't do that now.
And actually, I'm sorry, Cap, actually kind of help paint that picture, though, if we want to. We can kind of look back at where we are now and kind of maybe look at the 70s as a whole. Like, where is culture now at this point in that kind of mid-70s of right after Alive? Because at this point, like you say, Kiss is starting to kind of seep into, the consciousness, just that touch.
It's about to get, crazy. Before we start...
Yeah.
We should introduce ourselves.
That's right.
We're not professional broadcasters, so we ought to do this correctly.
Yeah.
Just so people know. I'm Russ Ward, and with me is Cap Nunn.
Hello, everybody.
Alex Stiff.
Hello.
From the Something Good For You podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed.
Shared over most of these same airwaves.
That's right.
Isn't that how they say it? I don't know.
It's close enough.
Most of the same network.
Part of the network. There we go.
Part of the network. So we're trudging through the history of Kiss album by album, but year by year. We are going now into a very important album.
Yeah, they got the success off of Alive, and now they're going to they need new material, and they need it to be good. They need a good follow up to a successful live album.
We are rolling into the Destroyer album.
Mm-hmm. Because at that point, they're rolling into late 75, 76 by this point.
We're in late 75.
Touring their asses off.
There's a lot going on. So the album Alive is actually released, I guess, what was it? Did we say September of 75?
Yep, September 10th, 75.
So in this era, right here at the same time, Bill Aucoin, and Rocksteady, I guess, is in a lawsuit with Casablanca over, give us money.
Yeah.
You promised money, and we have no money. And, of course, Casablanca are like, we're doing everything we can, man. And
we don't have any money either.
And they're like, well, that's not our problem. That's your problem. And so they don't really want to leave Casablanca because they realize and recognize how much Neil Bogart and Casablanca has, committed to him. And I don't know, did we talk about it in the last episode? I'm getting some of this stuff getting kind of confused because, of course, there is no time to turn.
Yes.
And they are so busy, and there's so much going on that we're going to start seeing stuff kind of overlap as far as, I guess, the general eras of and certainly from one album to the next, because they're clipping out 2 albums a year, which you think is crazy, but that really wasn't that unusual. I mean, a lot of groups were doing that in that era.
Kiss was just doing it, but they didn't have like you were saying, they didn't have the funding behind it initially, or if they did, but they were just kind of just scraping by and just living off Bill Aucoin's credit cards. And as soon as Alive peaked and took off, a lot of problems were being solved, and but then to your point, they're still figuring out what to do now that they are selling records.
Well, and before we even get to that, something I wanted to actually kind of mention, because we always kind of like putting things in perspective. So Alive came out in September of 75. We always kind of talk about how sometimes culture and what's kind of going on also affects pop culture and what's trending and what sells. The Vietnam War ended in April 75. Yeah. So I wonder if maybe it was even part of that perfect storm of, okay, we finished up the war. Now we have this loud party anthem. Everyone's feeling excited because even later in the year, Jaws got released. And of course, that wound up being a huge success. So I wonder if maybe it was that part of it, of America looking for that fun, fantastical release. And Kiss also just happened to be at the right place at the right time.
Well, we've talked about that in the previous episode. It's the post-hippie kind of generation. We're getting into the excess. The 70s was, the era of excess. And, everything sort of kind of become, it's, you start seeing, like you said, with Jaws, that was the first big blockbuster film. Mm-hmm. You get these kind of, that was part of the appeal for me as a kid, was just these over the top characters. You have, characters like the Fonz on television. You have a real life superhero running around on a motorcycle called Evel Knievel.
I was about to mention.
Evel Knievel actually left a really big impression with you. Like anytime I think about Russ, it's usually Evel Knievel and Kiss, and those two really seem to kind of go hand in hand with you.
Well, Evel Knievel, I mean, he just, he was such a over the top personality and this just, iconic presence, and he had such a, charisma, and it was just a force of nature.
It also probably didn't help that he had an action figure that he could jump over your Kiss action figures.
Yeah, that's true. But you had like the $6 Million Man on television also, and
Star Wars was bubbling up.
Star Wars was about to come out, and it was just a different era, and things just sort of were. It seemed like whereas everything was so serious in the 60s with, everyone was very political minded and stuff. And I think everyone else by the 70s, this is also post Watergate. I think people were in post Vietnam. People are just worn out. They're just tired of it. And it's just like, let's just get some mindless big entertainment in. And what fits that better than Kiss?
Oh, absolutely.
And pure uncut cocaine.
Which has probably a lot to do with what we're going to talk about
today. I feel like within that sentence, we hit on like 3 things that foreshadow the upcoming on this record being big, fantastical, cocaine, and Kiss.
Well, part of that has already been laid. The groundwork has already been laid in I'll say even specifically with Alice Cooper's $1 Billion Babies album. That really started informing, I think, or reflecting the culture. And, and by no coincidence, the producer is Bob Ezrin, who they're going to be bringing in for Destroyer. Mm-hmm. Before we get to that, there's just a couple of things that have been going on, and I don't know exactly where all this fits in the overall timeline, but in this general era, I think we talked about, I'm pretty sure in the previous episode, Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise tried to talk Aucoin into taking Kiss to another label. Yeah. Apparently there was label interest in Kiss, and this is before Alive's success. And I think we talked about it. They had not had generated commercial interest, but they were generating professional interest. Yes. Which is to say, there was a professional interest in recognizing there was a commercial opportunity to create, there would
with the right amount of marketing and yada,
whatever. Yada. And at the same time, Neil Bogart was trying to do the same thing. He was trying to snag Kiss away from Bill Aucoin. He had done it with Donna Summer, and Donna Summer's hit is Just Breaking with Love to Love You Baby, which is very important. It's the two-fisted punch that brought Casablanca
up from the wreckage
into the black and but for good. A coin divides Rocksteady with a coin management, and I think Rocksteady is essentially becomes primarily Kiss, and then, or maybe I forget. Maybe
I think. Well, I know that we still saw Rocksteady logos on stuff for a while.
Yeah,
I may be incorrect on this. You can probably correct me on this. Isn't Rocksteady where they primarily pushed the merchandising, and then a coin management?
No, the merchandising was done under something called Bootwell, and that's still not in play yet.
Yeah, I knew that wasn't in play yet. I just didn't know if that's what it morphed into. But yeah, I'm probably wrong on that.
I don't know. Well, we'll get to that.
Again,
that's a good point. That's a good point.
But no, I do know exactly what you're talking about, how separated it.
As all this is going on, they're still thinking big. They're still thinking, and I'm not talking about the band. I'm talking about people like Neil Bogart and Bill Aucoin. They're looking to, to build a career off of all of this, and they're building it off the backs of what Kiss is doing. And Kiss is the band that's in the trenches. And again, they're not super wealthy at all. And in fact, there is no wealth. They're not, They're leading a fairly meager existence, but they're projecting this super iconic, like, we're Kiss.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting, too, that Bogart was trying to nab Kiss away from a coin after the Donna Summer thing, because with Donna Summer already had a proven hit with Disco. Kiss still wasn't a proven hit yet.
This is probably all around the same time.
Right, but Kiss wasn't a proven hit quite yet I guess with Alive. But again, I would still assume that Donna Summer's record did a lot more than Kiss's did, regardless. So, and Casablanca, as we know, eventually did basically turn into the premier disco label. So I find it odd, though, that out of all the primary disco things, he still really had his eyes set on Kiss. They were still going to be the redheaded stepchild, even if he did gain full ownership of it.
They were the first act that he signed. They're kind of the cornerstone of the label. And, I hate to say this, but I'm sure his interest was largely a very crass, I'm going to make money here.
Yeah, it's like when they talk about when he produced Dressed to Kill. It's like Neil's not a producer; he's a business guy.
Well, part of that was because of the deal with Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise. They found out about that because Neil Bogart is having an affair with Joyce Biowitz, who's the co-manager of Kiss. Which is, again, you've got this conflict of interest going on, and I think that's part of why Rocksteady and Aucoin sort of divides into two companies, and Joyce Biowitz quits. And I don't know if she goes to work for Casablanca or not, but I'd
actually really like to. I could be totally wrong. She could have, but I'd actually really like to hear Joyce's story. It seems like she'd have some pretty good perspective on the inner workings of everything.
A lot of this I source out of the books. There's there's a glut of Kiss books, and I think they're all worth reading if you're a Kiss nerd.
There was also the Casablanca book that came out a handful of years ago.
Larry Harris wrote the In Party Every Day book.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of really great information on that. So, I'm not going to deny where I've cited, or failed to cite my sources. I've pulled a lot of this information from a lot of these books.
And I think as long as we continue to cite those sources, I think we're going to be totally in the clear. And I think that's even a benefit, is the fact that we're actually citing these sources and kind of going, hey, we've pulled it from this because we've noticed, not even just in Kiss media, but just the media we enjoy with music and bands, we just hear a lot of information that gets spit out without any sort of, and I read it and found it here.
Well, it doesn't, and even if it's in a book, doesn't make it gospel.
Exactly. So it's always good to kind of back it up as that, being like, I'm not even saying this is true. It's where I read it.
Especially from the members of the band. Like the bulk of my research for this episode came from the memoirs of the four members, and there's a lot of stuff that doesn't line up from a different perspective, but we'll poke holes at that when we get to them.
Well, the thing is, there's the old adage that there's three sides to every story: your side, my side, and then there's the truth.
Yep.
And nobody's wrong.
Right.
No one's telling a lie. But you know how that goes. So let's rewind just a hair, because I want to talk a little bit about we ended, I think, the last episode. They've gone into the studio already. This is September of '75 with Bob Ezrin. What are they doing? There seems to be even now, a little bit of confusion as to were they demoing songs or were they cutting basic tracks for what would become Destroyer? Because from what I have figured out, at this point, because of the lawsuit, Casablanca gets wind of this and shuts down that session. I don't know exactly the details on that, if they had to serve an injunction or whatever. I don't, but what were they doing? This is in September of 75. So they're already laying the groundwork for what's going to be Destroyer. If they're already in there laying down basic tracks.
Electric Lady, correct?
Well, so
I believe so.
Yeah, that so far that's all the information I've gathered. But you saying that actually filled in one little hole, because the information I had usually ran on was shortly after they had like that little window of break after riding around promoting Alive, is that this was the first time that Gene and Paul really started doing their own outside writing. So like Gene would get together with like the road crew, because Big John Hart could play, drums or something, and the announcer, what was his name, JR?
Yeah,
JR could play an instrument. Yeah, JR could play drums. That's what it was.
He plays on the Detroit, or not the
just Detroit Rock City demo, I believe.
I think he also plays on the God of Thunder demo, doesn't he?
Possibly.
Well, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But what I'm getting at is, I believe those sessions were kind of what they were doing at that point, because Paul even mentions doing demos at a Coins house or office.
Okay, but they're in the studios. What I'm saying, they're in Electric Lady.
Right. I think they're just cutting ideas.
Maybe that's possible.
Yeah.
Now, Bob Ezrin insists they're cutting basic tracks.
Really?
And his recollection, but Bob was, admittedly,
but he had a little bit of a cold.
Let's talk a little bit about Bob Ezrin, because I think it's interesting to note here. I mean, I don't know, do we need to go into his history? I think everyone knows that.
We can give a brief history.
He's from Toronto. He's working for a company called Nimbus 9, and they're making records for like the Guess Who. He works under a guy named Jack Richardson. He's a prodigy. I mean, at the time by the time he's working on this Kiss album, he's only 26 years old.
That's insane.
So he's already had how many Alice Cooper records under his belt at this point?
3 or 4?
No, it's more like 5, I think. Let's see, Love It to Death, Killer, School's Out, $1 Billion Babies, and Muscle. No, he didn't do Muscle of Love. He bowed out on that.
But I forgot he went back that far. You're right.
But he's got success already.
Obviously he produced Lou Reed's Berlin album, which is a pretty heavy record. If not heavy as far as like musically heavy, but just a conceptually heavy record.
Yeah,
and it's pretty dense with its production. I mean, he's the man.
Went on to produce The Wall by Pink Floyd.
He would go on to do that. It's interesting to note here that, so the fact that he'd worked with Alice Cooper and the similarities between Alice Cooper and Kiss, I came across an interesting tidbit, by the way, that Shep Gordon, Alice Cooper's manager, saw a Kiss show and reckoned that it cost as much to produce a single Kiss show as it would an entire Alice Cooper tour. That's not true, but that's how impressed he was by it.
Perception is reality, man.
Yep.
And Bob Ezrin allegedly first hears of Kiss, and I'm going to assume this would have taken him back to the late summer, early fall of 74. There is a kid that lives in Toronto named Mike Longman, who has started calling Bob Ezrin at home because Bob's phone number was still listed in the phone book, and would talk music. And one of the things he championed very early on was, man, you got to do this band Kiss, And just by coincidence, he meets Kiss, and there's a little confusion as to where that happens, but it seems to have occurred in a stairwell somewhere, either at a local show or apparently he says it was at a TV studio. I've never seen any footage of Kiss in a TV studio. I don't know what they would have been doing at that time, but the famous story is they bump into each other and Bob goes, "Do you like the sound of your records?" They're like, Yeah. Well, if you don't, give me a call.
That's kind of mentioned in Paul's memoir, where it was in a stairwell or something like that. I can't recall if I don't have that written down as far as that was the exchange or not.
I think that would have had to. Now I think generally they date that in '75, but in looking at the touring history and whatever, it's probably late '74, which means they're probably. Let's see. I haven't gone back.
I was gonna say if it's
I don't
TV
even
studio,
know if Hotter Than Hell's out yet at this point.
well then if Hotter Than Hell wouldn't be out at that point, TV studio, that could be any of those early TV.
Well, this is in Toronto.
Okay, well then could it have been for the "Come On and Love Me" and "Rock and Roll All Night" music video shoot?
That was at the Michigan Palace in Detroit.
See, this is why I love having you on the show. You're like my quick Google. I can just throw stuff out like that real quick, and you're like, no.
But the connection was made, and eventually, the decision is made to bring Bob Ezrin in to do the next Kiss album. Mm-hmm. And he wants to work with them as much as they want to work with him. And again, he's 26 years old, I think, here. Or 20, maybe 25, 26, something like that.
That's what blows my mind. Because I'm sitting here, I'm still the youngest at the table. I'm 28.
Well, consider you go back and, I mean, he's done all this Alice Cooper stuff all in his early 20s, you know.
Mm-hmm. Classics, too.
Yeah. So, the guy has pedigree. He's
a classically trained musician.
Yeah, so he's bringing a lot of that into what as we'll see. He wants to expand the appeal of Kiss, meaning he wants girls to like Kiss because it's very much a boy thing, you know. And I think if anyone knows anything about music, you're not going to be successful if you don't appeal to girls. Mm-hmm. Not on any grand scale.
And that's just the truth.
And he's got to figure out a way to expand their appeal. And that's what he sees as a challenge. He wants to, he sees that there is a potential to create a greater dramatic depth to this band that has so much drama around their kind of characters anyhow.
Yeah, and part of that is kicking their asses into gear musically.
Yeah, that and both Gene and Paul both saying that him challenging them to quit singing "Suck Me, Fuck Me" songs.
Yeah, and so they're in the studio in September '75. They get shut down. Bill Aucoin tries to get Bob Ezrin. He tries to secure him independent of the label, paying him out of his own pocket to keep this going because he's thinking, well, this album might go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, contractually, and Bob Ezrin understands this, he can't do that. Ezrin has been, see, now this is where things get confusing to me. It's like, how could they, because I've read this initially that Bill Aucoin was financing these sessions, but I think because they're under contract to Casablanca, by obligation, they have to give this stuff to Casablanca. I mean, technically it belongs to the label. I'm not exactly sure to the details, but
that's interesting.
Am I making sense with
yes,
that?
It does.
Absolutely.
Even though they're paying for it out of their own pocket, anything they record by rights belongs to Casablanca because they're still under contract to them.
We've had some friends that have actually dealt with that exact thing to the point where our records are not even getting released, even though they paid for it. That record company owns it, and if they're not going to release it, he can't release it either. So no, that would have been under the same kind of situation just back then.
Yeah.
So they end up touring out the rest of that year. They hit the road again. Alive is happening now.
They're it's successful. People they're packing places out, and now Mom and Dad know who Kiss are.
Now, real quick, so were they already in the studio before touring Alive?
Yeah, that's what because Alive came out that same week. So those first 2 weeks in September, they're in the studio with Bob Ezrin already doing something.
Well,
and again,
let's
he says
play,
they're cutting tracks. They say, I guess it's believed that, but I've never heard any demo tracks that sound like they were recorded by Bob Ezrin.
No, what I was going to say is, so let's play
all
our
4 of the guys on it.
Let's put on our cape and cowls and let's play Batman a minute and let's do a little detective. So we know we might be jumping around in timeline a little bit, but I'm throwing out just things that my brain is working on. Possibly you have notes. I could have gotten notes on this, but I didn't realize this was like such a weird thing, and I didn't even know that, or I would have actually double checked. But we've discussed earlier that Detroit Rock City and God of Thunder demos. When was that recorded, and do we know where?
I think that information's out there, but I don't have it.
Exactly.
There's people that have detailed those
Cap,
demos.
to see if you can find that real quick while we're rambling.
But I've read that. Actually, got it pulled up right here.
Okay, perfect.
Actually, I've read that 15 demos were made in August of '75, and that they were all rejected except for God of Thunder and Detroit Rock City by Bob Ezrin.
Well, that doesn't mean he recorded them.
Yeah,
that means
exactly.
he's heard them.
Right.
He's rejected them.
Everything I read was just him rejecting them.
Right, so that would lead credence to Gene running off with the road crew recording demos, Paul recording demos with a coin, taking those. Now Ezrin's hearing those and only picks out one, and then probably rewrites some like Detroit Rock City and stuff. Well, but I wonder if that re-record time, them working on that, would now be that first session that we're now trying to figure out before it gets shut down.
What do you mean?
Filtering through those separate demos that Cap just referenced, where he approved only one. I wonder if that was that time period that we're trying to sort through now.
I don't know. He has them in the studio, but they're in Electric Lady here. Mm-hmm. But when they resume sessions in January of '76 and start recording, quote unquote, for real,
right?
They're at the record plant, the New York City location of the record plant. So I don't know exactly what all's happened here. This is kind of a question mark, and like what exactly was done in this period. Mm-hmm. What of it made the album if they were using it as basic tracks?
Yeah, we can only
It doesn't
speculate.
seem to make sense that they would be doing basic tracks, because usually they build a foundation of drums and then
that's what I'm thinking.
But that's not exactly how they did it in the studio. Once they get to the record plant, they're recording the tracks essentially live in the studio, although they don't keep the stuff, like they're ghost tracking.
Yeah,
but they're playing live together when they're tracking, like certainly for the drums. But in January of '76, they also have their new costumes, but they're not going to debut these costumes again until summer. But the costumes are created, and they do a photo shoot. A lot of the pictures that that we all know, in particular, there's a famous shoot where they're on motorcycles.
Yep.
All of this is done the first time they get these costumes. They were designed by Larry Legaspi, who had been doing costumes for like LaBelle and Funkadelic, and later would do Divine.
And they were all on Casablanca too, right?
I don't think LaBelle was, but Funkadelic was. And they also did... Well, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. They were already well into the Destroyer sessions about 2 weeks in when they did a big PR thing for the recording of the symphonic parts for Great Expectations and Beth.
And that's where we get those photos of Ezra dressed up with the top hat
with the top
and the cape.
hat and the tails, yeah. So they're in the studio. They're at Record Plant, New York City location, Studio A. This is also where the Dolls cut their first album. It's where Aerosmith had cut Toys in the Attic. It's being engineered by Jay Messina and Corky Stasiak. Corky Stasiak will also pop up on some other Kiss albums, or at least another Kiss album.
So they got themselves a team.
So y'all just want to run this, song by song here?
Well, first things first, I was wanting to make sure you weren't going to go back to it. The one thing I'm just trying to think on is we do have the two sessions. I had something in my head right before I started leading into it. If I'd cut you off, I would have remembered, but I didn't want to do that.
Oh, you could have cut me off so you don't lose any of your thoughts.
Well, no, I did. Yeah, it felt like you were rolling into something good, so I didn't want to do that. But yeah, we can go track by track. I think that'd be fine.
Well, I don't know the order that these songs were recorded in.
Well, the context with all of it too is Bob, like I was saying earlier, just shaping everybody to learn how to tune their instruments and to keep time and things like that too. And that was they were getting over their own hurdles as far as being professional musicians too.
I actually do remember now.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so you did say they went in the studio for a minute and then they hit the road again, and then they went back to the studio to finish.
Right.
I think there is a little bit of credence to them to actually doing something in the studio because correct me if I'm wrong, were they not playing Flaming Youth and I think Detroit Rock City on the tail end of that Alive tour? I've seen
in the
videos
spring of
of them,
'76.
but they were still in their Alive costumes.
But that's why I'm differentiating the fact that they're doing these costume pictures now, but they're not being used. They're for later for the Destroyer.
Okay, so if that was spring of '76, that would still be after the second session. Then okay, never mind. Yep. I thought I found them. I thought I found one extra little string for you to help connect it. Oh well,
we're gonna get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but in January they're recording. In January they're recording the album finally.
Okay, yeah.
In proper.
Second
Yeah,
session.
from January to February, and every session started with Bob with the blackboard and a whistle, and a lot of cocaine on the table.
Yeah,
and
there was cocaine present, as to what the usage was and by who. That
I got to mention this. This was in
stuff here.
I got to mention this from Gene's book. When he saw the little mirror that was kind of stapled to the table, his first thought was, "That's stupid. You have to look down to see your reflection."
Yeah.
That and he said also he thought it was like powdered creamer, which had been like the new hot thing in the '70s, or Sweet and Low. Because he thought it was like just some stuff for like coffee or whatever. Which also, let's think back for a second. How much do you think that is genuine ignorance? Because again, we do have to remember it's a young teen immigrant now in the U.S. that probably hasn't really been around that much kind of odd drug use.
I think by that point
I would think he would have a clue.
He would have more than a clue as to what was what.
If your bandmates are Ace Frehley and Peter Criss.
I don't think Ace and Peter were doing it too hard that yet.
I don't think it's. I don't. Whatever.
But do we also see ourselves, or do we also see Gene putting himself in a position of seeming that dumb?
No,
I don't think so.
I don't.
What's that razor for? Do you stir your coffee with that razor?
Yeah, allegedly, they're greeted at the studio. I don't know which time, but apparently they showed up and Bob Ezrin was completely nude, save for a bow tie, as a means to just sort of kind of break the ice. But
I need to start doing that every time we get a new drummer.
In Peter's book, he talks about how he gets a fire extinguisher and just sprays it all over the studio.
Yeah, well, they were trying to break up, the monotony. There's all those stories. I don't think that really relates much to anything important. I mean,
actually, real quick, do we want to talk about studio stories first, or do track by track? Because I feel like it's going to be hard to kind of bounce back and forth on that.
Well, I don't know. What do you got?
Well, I mean, we know the traditional stories of Bob creating like his own metrodome by putting like a tiny little microphone in a box, or putting a microphone in a room and hitting a box, so to kind of help keep count with Peter, so he can stay on track better.
Well, this before click tracks.
They were also allegedly, depending on the song, they would move the drums from one part of the studio to the other to record it in different ways, which it seems like it would be a weird way of doing things that make things sound inconsistent. But I don't know.
I've read how like drums were reversed during like God of Thunder and things like that too.
Well, that would have been his trickery that he brings into
but still
stuff. But they were.
It seems overall that no one enjoyed the process. Like all four. Like we're like, oh my god, this is like teeth grating. But I feel like in retrospect, Gene and Paul love and appreciate everything he did. Peter looks back at the experience like, oh, that was something we needed to do. I still don't think Ace looks at this experience as a positive.
Ace did not.
Ace didn't get along, I don't think, very well with Bob Ezrin's methodology.
No.
He and Peter were like they're field players, and Bob's telling them how to play specific
Bob
things.
Bob had very specific ideas as to what he wanted and how he wanted it, and that's one thing that's interesting about Bob Ezrin is he not only does he put his stamp on the whole musical output, but a lot of it, I mean, it's a smart way to move. You look on the album and you see he gets a lot of songwriting credit as well.
Yeah,
that's a smart move on his part. But he, and part of that's born out of necessity because he's trying to get what he wants. And if he can't get what he wants out of the four guys, he's still going to get it on the record by hook or by crook, as we will get to shortly. But let's just go track by track and kind of examine this. Obviously, the album starts with with Detroit Rock City, but it starts with that long opening kind of montage. It's like a sonic movie. If you close your eyes, you can kind of see it. Now, I think the idea they were trying to get was it's a TV or a radio while someone's washing dishes.
Yeah, I've always picked that up.
I always thought when I was young, I thought it was supposed to be like a diner.
I could see that.
I just thought it was like the ambiance of a the clicking of plates and what have you.
And
but either way, the point is you're hearing the news report and it's about to tell you the story of what you're going to hear in this song.
And do we know who the news reporter is?
Well, it's Bob Ezrin, but Gene Simmons has claimed credit on it too.
I was going to say Gene's claimed credit on it, and later on Bob has backed him up on it. I've also heard Bob say it was him, but later on he's been like, "Oh yeah, that was Gene." Well,
either way, they did the binaural recording, which was kind of a new thing where if you listen to it on headphones, you were there.
Yeah, that was a brand new. It was like a 3D microphone, brand new technology for the time.
And they went out and they got the car engine noise and the guy's riding behind the wheel. I can see this in my head. It's almost like you hear that there's a change where it's like inside the car and now you're outside the car, and it's almost like you can just picture it like as a movie. The way I always did in my head was you're in the car and then it pictures and you can see the car riding along on the horizon. And then you're back in the car again and he's listening. And he's half drunk. That's all really cool stuff to think. Who thinks of that stuff? And obviously that's a Ezrin idea.
And one of my favorite little techie little minutia things about this is the way they actually got a Rock and Roll All Night playing in the background. They didn't get a cassette tape and put it in the tape deck and just hit play. They had access to a short-range radio projector in the studio. So they hijacked a radio station and blasted Rock and Roll All Night. So they actually got a legit radio station signal in for Rock and Roll All Night within a car stereo.
That's pretty cool.
It's some interesting stuff. And I tell you what's weird is you don't think about it now because you don't know it any other way. But I mean, this goes on for nearly a minute before the song even starts. This isn't an album starting straight away with boom, which is what the record company would probably want. Instead, you've got this what the hell is all this?
And you know what? And even in the 21st century, the digital and CD releases do not separate it. You have to go to greatest hits CDs to get just straight to the point Detroit Rock City. They still leave it as the whole track.
And rightly so. I mean, this song has got Ezrin all over it.
I was going to say.
You listen to the demo we now have, it exists, and it's very, very different. Obviously, he wrote that solo.
He wrote that solo, and he wrote that bass line, that boom boom.
Yeah,
that was him too.
I was going to say that's not like anything Gene had ever played before.
Yeah.
That solo part, is I think he wrote that on piano.
Yeah, they say it was a mixture of piano, and Ace has said before he kind of just held, Ezrin hummed it to him, and he kind of just ran his finger up the fretboards until he found the keys, and he's like, no, different note. Okay, that one there, and just kind of helped build up that solo.
And then Paul found the harmony, and now we have a classic.
And again, whose idea was that? I mean, all
Ezrin.
of this seems like it was probably puzzled together as well, as a lot of these tracks are. Now, allegedly, this song is inspired by a story that circulated that they heard that a kid was killed
on their way
to a show. Do you know where that was allegedly said to have happened?
Detroit? I mean, no. Where?
Charlotte, North Carolina.
Really?
And
No joke.
James Campion, who wrote the Making of Destroyer book that's really excellent, spends the last, kind of like an epilogue, trying to track down this true story on this. I mean, he spends pages and pages on this. He tracked as much as he could to try to figure out when and where this occurred and who it was, and kind of came up cold.
Wow.
So, that's only because it's based on a specific idea that, it's been burned into the collective consciousness. This comes from roadies as well. Oh, we heard about that when we were in Charlotte. Well, it could have been Fayetteville. Mm-hmm. Could have been Greenville, South Carolina. It's just right now. He figured all this out. It was like they're playing in that concentrated area over a course of a couple of days.
Right.
It could have been any of those places, and they just conflated it in their head as Charlotte. But then again, the story might be apocryphal. It might not even be true at all. Does it matter? No.
The myth is better.
Yeah.
I want to read that book now, though.
Oh, the book is excellent.
And one other note about Detroit Rock City, it's one of those situations where, again, we love Gene and Paul to death, but, sometimes their words can be a little bit, rewritten, and sometimes other people's words are a bit more taken to the bank. And I kind of tend to lean on Bob Ezrin's words on things, especially when it comes to this, because I've heard him do interviews talking about Alice Cooper things, and Cooper's 100% backed him up. It seems like Ezrin's got a decent memory, all things considered. He says up one side and down the other that there was no extra trickery, that was Peter through and through on this record, that monstrous drum sound, because Gene and Paul have even tried to say like a session guy came in to have to play Detroit Rock City.
I've never heard him say that.
Yeah, Gene has said that. Like, it was a mid-2000s interview, someone was talking about, just success and everything. It's like, they went on the whole Ace and Peter were druggies thing that they went on for a minute, and they were like, oh yeah, and even Detroit Rock City, Peter couldn't play that. He couldn't play that intricate, jazzy drum beat type thing.
Never ever heard that.
Yeah, so even Ezrin's been like, you can take that to the bank, that Peter plays every note on that.
Well, then that leads pretty well into the next one, which is King of the Nighttime World, because that role that kind of sustains through it.
Yep.
Eric Carr hated that and had a really hard time playing it and didn't like it.
Really? I didn't hear. I've never heard that.
Heard that. What's interesting about this song is this is not a Kiss song.
No.
It took me forever to know that.
This was brought to them by Kim Fowley. And Kim Fowley was a kind of a low-level impresario in Southern California and had his fingers in all kinds of pie.
Probably most famously with the Runaways.
With the Runaways pie.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was hearing it. I wasn't gonna lean into it.
You had to.
We looked at each other. It happened.
He.
But if you know the story.
He curated the Runaways, but he had worked some with a guy named, I think his name was Mark Anthony.
Yeah, Mark Anthony,
who was in a band called the Hollywood Stars.
And they brought this song to, they bring this to the band, they bring this to Bob first.
Hollywood Stars recorded, I've seen it called demos. I don't know, they're pretty polished if they're demos. They recorded an entire album's worth of material that never got released. They broke up. I'm not exactly sure the details of that. Eventually they would get back together, I guess, and finally did release an album in the late 70s. But a lot of the material they did in the early 70s never got released, and it got parlayed out to the song Escape on Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare was also a Hollywood Star song, and that was Mark Anthony again.
So those two were kind of in and out with Bob Ezrin's orbit for a minute.
I think Kim Fowley was the connection there, and I can't remember exactly how that connection's made.
And if we could stay there for a second, those are two songs that it took me forever to know that they were not originals to both Cooper and Kiss. Why is it that band really never got a lot of recognition? Because clearly they were pretty good at writing songs, because I love both of those songs.
Well, I guess that was it. That was the recognition. I mean, I don't know.
But what I'm saying is that being the recognition it took me forever to know. So they really didn't get the recognition. Yeah. If like the casual fan wouldn't know those were covers.
Well, I think they kind of went out of their way to make sure that people didn't know that they were covers per se.
That's my
'Cause,
point.
I mean, that was because it was essential to maintain the mythology of your band being,
Right.
absolute.
Yeah.
I mean, outside short of having the songwriting credit, and
Right.
and those guys are, he's making money on the back end because he's got the publishing or whatever. That was what Kim Fowley had to get his finger in there, and
He needs some
We
money.
gotta quit referring to Kim and putting fingers in things.
it's a great song, and if anyone has the interest, you can find it. They're on obviously YouTube and whatever. And then the album was released, the Hollywood Stars, all that material that from that era, on a album called now my brain is slipping. I forget what it's called.
People are yelling at us right
Something
now.
to do with the radio. God, it's a really good. It's a good collection of songs. I'm surprised that they never caught any traction on their own. Because,
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at. Is like they seem to be good songwriters, so it seems like
Probably just couldn't-
out of the two, I'm sure they've got more in them.
Probably just couldn't keep a band together to record them or anything like that.
We know nothing about that.
But King of the Nighttime World that's one of my favorite riffs on the record for sure. I love that Paul Stanley chord all over it.
Yeah, kind of during the verses, the bow 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 down.
Yeah.
look that up real quick. Hollywood Stars, because I don't want that to go unstated. The album, it's
Totally.
Now I'm gonna have to actually.
It's right at the tip of my tongue. I'm sure by the time you look it up, I might have it. But actually, the story that inspired the song originally had something to do with these guys, being young and stupid. One of the band members was getting how shall we say this discreetly?
What am I looking up? Album titles?
Yeah, it's
He was getting some enjoyment.
he was getting oral pleasure.
If you will.
and didn't know that the other guys were in a car like laughing and spying on him, and they turned the headlights on, and then his girlfriend got nicknamed the Headlight Queen. And that made its way into the lyric, you're my headlight queen.
Nice.
Everything I've seen is all self-titled with Hollywood Stars.
Yeah, well, that's the one album. They have I forget. It's Heart Like, not Heart Like a Radio. I forget what it's called.
Let's see.
I should know this. I feel like an idiot because here we are recording this. I should have had this in my notes.
Shine Like a Radio.
Shine Like a Radio.
There it is.
And it's really good. The point is, it's really good. It's worth seeking out. And it's not just because of the Kiss connection. It's a good album.
What would you kind of relate it to?
It's just early 70s kind of, it's
Pop
not hard
rock.
but kind of like pop rock.
Yeah, cool though.
I'm a fan of that.
It's really, really good. I mean, it's guitar based. It's, it's not, wimpy or whatever.
Cool deal.
It's not it's not like the Osmonds. But hey, the Osmonds had some rocking tunes,
Dude.
man.
What was the no, that's a whole other podcast.
I'm just saying it's not like Puppy Love is
Right.
what I mean by that.
But no, then we got God of Thunder right after that.
God of Thunder is interesting because Paul Stanley wrote it.
And it was a completely different song.
Well, the demo is.
Yeah.
Because of that drum beat, really. It's
Yeah,
faster,
but
and
that changes the whole
It changes
thing.
the whole feel and vibe. But Bob Ezrin's the one that went, wait a minute, God of Thunder, you're not the God of Thunder. The demon is the God. No, not Paul Stanley, not Gene Simmons, but the characters.
Right.
This the lover is not the God of Thunder.
Yeah.
The demon is the God of Thunder. And he pulls it away, and I know Paul's probably like, what the fuck?
I know it.
That's my song.
And it is because in recent days, like within like the last 5 years or so, Paul takes every chance he gets to be like, I wrote Gene's biggest song.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. And that's fair. It's fair for him to take the credit because
It's true.
You can, again, we're looking at all this with hindsight, but you compare the demo to the finished song, and all I've ever known is the finished song.
Yeah.
It's Gene's signature song. You've always associated it with Gene. You never think, oh, Paul wrote that.
That
even
is
though
his
we
moment.
had even when we were kids, we had the album. We look at that stuff. We'd look at those songwriting credits. We'd be like, well, that's weird. Paul wrote that, But you don't hear it as a Paul song, but until you hear the demo of his version.
And then you hear the DNA.
It's still a little different, though, from what Paul would normally write. It doesn't sound like, even in his demo, it doesn't seem like lyrically,
Apparently he was writing that one and I Want You around the same time.
Oh, yeah.
Now think about the riff and I Want You. But
it's more of a funk kind of a thing. It has a more funk vibe, which is...
it absolutely does.
Which we've talked about. There's a heavy R&B influence on a lot of what Kiss does, and it never gets much noted or recognized. But you see it, especially in that demo.
Absolutely.
And it just gets morphed into what it is on the album because it becomes a Gene thing.
Got a thunder.
It comes a lot, they slow it down and it plods. I think it plods a little bit. I'm not a
fan of the studio version either.
I think it's interesting, he brought in his kids and they're doing
Bob's
all the
kids.
Bob Ezrin has his kids on it. His kids are on several of his records. But they're, they got that effect through with the like some sort of radio walkie-talkie kind of thing.
Because I heard the live version first, and then I heard the studio version on the radio one time, and then with all the kids on it, and I just went like, this is too weird. I like the live version better.
And as legend tells, don't know if it's true or not, legend tells, because of course kids and animals are the two things you don't deal with. Kids will never act on command. In order to get the kids to do like just random screams and make it sound genuine, he let them hang out the studio for a couple hours and then lied to them and said it was bedtime.
No, that's not God of Thunder.
That wasn't God of Thunder?
No, that's... there's a song called The Kids on Berlin, and the song deals with the kids being taken away from the mother by the, I guess, the social services or whatever, and that's the lyric. They're taking the children away because they say she has been a bad mother.
Right.
And there's a part in it where it plays this sort of atonal kind of flute part, and the kids start going, Mama! and they're crying, and that's when he told them, bedtime.
Got it. Okay. So, that was that's where I conflated that story then. Got it.
Because people thought, what did he do to those kids to make them cry like that?
I just told him it was bedtime. If you've ever been a dad or been a brother or sister, you know that's all it takes.
But it's interesting that he does this on God of Thunder. I don't know why he would be inspired to do something like that, but I can tell you how I heard it when I was young, when I was small. I heard it as a song where Kiss are torturing these kids or a kid. We just heard it as one kid.
Yeah.
And I always pictured that like somehow he's like, tied to a chair or something, and they're just, performing around him with the blood drooling and all that, and he's like, no! Because Kiss was kind of scary when you're like, especially when you're like 5 or 6. A lot of my initial impressions of Kiss was it was kind of like, what the hell is this?
Well, dude,
I wasn't thinking what the hell. I was 5, but
even with
all like, what is this?
Even with me getting everything up to the mid 90s all at once, man, I still put on that one as a kid, and I got almost the same picture. Mine was just more or less a kid being tortured in hell, and he's just hearing this all around, and just he's in hell getting burned or whatever, whatever the kid's mind, your mind wraps up.
That's part of what made it fun. Is again, it's what you bring to it with you. It leaves enough open space for you to bring your own imagination into it and feed it what you want, and what you feed it is what you're going to get back.
I heard the kids as like little minions to Gene.
Yeah, little demons.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I never thought of that.
Because they're kind of upbeat on the track. They're like, okay.
Yeah. Well,
except for that one that goes, he goes, it's after the solo, and he goes, I am the Lord of the Wasteland. He's like,
It sounds like he's being terrified.
Yeah, exactly. And plus, also being raised in a Christian home, hearing the line "slowly rob you of your virgin soul," I always knew that was a devil evil thing. So I also kind of like related to, okay, no, the kid is in hell, and this is what he's hearing in hell.
And yeah, I come from a religious home too. I can only imagine how like. Oh, gee, when you're younger, like, why do you hate Kiss so much, Mom?
I love it. All three. So I was raised in a church.
Silently points at this record.
This is kind of a quick sidebar, but all three of us were raised in like a church kind of scenario, and that's probably and us gravitating towards Kiss kind of makes a little bit more sense now, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, you had to rebel, man. So that leads into Great Expectations.
A complete 180.
Well, this is Bob Ezrin.
Yeah.
Almost through and through. I mean, even I think the demo was built around an arrangement that Bob Ezrin must have came up with. I don't know what the story is on the demo on that. In the demo, of course, he had the idea of name dropping all the other members.
I like that. I like it. You watch Paul playing guitar. You watch Pete beating his drums.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that's cool. Because when I remember listening to the lyrics to that as a kid, and everything is so singular, it's always...
I am the Lord of the Wasteland.
Well, yeah,
I want to rock and roll all night.
Well, not even that, but within that song, the lyrics are very singular into me. And when he refers to playing drums, even as a kid, I'm sitting here going, Gene, you don't play drums.
Yeah.
Well, this came out of a song. You know what? I didn't write this down. I'm so mad at myself for this. It had a different title. God. Why did I not write that down?
Really? I'd always heard Great Expectations.
It was not written as Great Expectations. I think that was Bob Ezrin's idea. And it was his idea to use the Beethoven...
The 8
thing in there. Is it pronounced pathetique?
Something like that.
And pathetic. I don't know.
I'm a guitar teacher, not a classical music instructor.
But obviously, very obviously, Kiss weren't ever going to come up with that. That's not an idea that was going to drop into their...
No, and musically, the demo is so similar. Exactly what you say. It had to have been something that Bob had arranged.
Because they were writing together by September of '75. We know that,
right?
So,
absolutely.
A lot of this could have been born out of that. They recorded the orchestra. We were talking about this a little earlier. They did all of this in one day because all the orchestra guys were all union and they're on union time, so they had to get it in and get it done, and which is interesting because they've turned it into a PR event and they're trying to get all this done in a very tightly controlled little piece of time because they don't want to pay overtime on union dues. And they get it. I mean, all of this is essentially, all the symphonic stuff is essentially recorded live. Peter allegedly does. Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to the Beth part in a minute.
Yeah,
we'll get to that.
Well, we'll have to spend some time on that one.
Obviously, we've talked about the photos that have circulated with Kiss and they're in their Destroyer outfits. They are not yet using them, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
So,
but they knew they were going to, so they just had to go ahead and dress on up.
This is all because it's all going to be geared towards the Destroyer thing. So let's
flip the record over.
Let's flip the record over. Side 2. We'll pop the needle on, and we get Flamin' Youth.
That's been a new favorite of mine lately. I don't know why, but
this is the most Frankenstein song. This is the most. Is this the only song that's credited to all 4?
It's Ace, Paul, Gene, and Ezrin. I didn't see Peter's name on it.
Well, they won't give Peter credit.
Well, but it all comes from pieces of song parts that they came. And Bob's like, well, what do you got? What do you got? So, I know there's a big part of it comes from a Gene song called Mad Dog. And I think that's the foundation of the song.
Mad Dog.
And, he's wanting them to play in 7/4 time. Now, what that means, I don't know.
Cap.
In 7/4 time, I'm not a drummer, so
you're a music teacher.
They can't get it because.
But it's not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's
the
not.
Band has to play in 7/4 time, which I think is probably might be the way that riff is written, and probably unconsciously. No, the da 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 da. But he just has sense. Peter playing.
Yeah,
all the way through it, which just keeps the thing going.
Right.
So how they, he just sort of stitched that together out of ideas, and here you've got pretty anthemic song.
I really do like it a lot too. And another note from the demo one, another possessive change. The original lyrics, our parents think we're crazy and they hate the things we do. We're stupid and we're lazy.
He changes it to I'm.
Well, I wonder if that was another Ezrin move, being like, you need to make these songs possessive instead of inclusive.
I wouldn't doubt that. It seems like I've read something about that, actually.
I like the arrangement trope where it's like it does the first chorus and then only gives like maybe like 1 or 2 bars of a second verse and then straight to the chorus after that.
It's a weird.
The songwriting has definitely progressed on this record, and it's due to Ezrin.
Well, and then of course, most famously and most controversially, he's introduced a new instrument into the mix here.
the
calliope.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was waiting for someone to say it.
Which
I wasn't
I
gonna be able
never
to.
heard as a calliope. When I was a kid, I just thought it was like an electric organ.
Yes, thank you. I was gonna just call it an organ.
I never heard that as a calliope. And I've
the-
talked about this with friends since, and they're like, you, that boop, 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 boop. And I'm like, I never heard that.
And for those that don't-
never clicked with me until I read that it was a calliope. I was like, oh.
Calliope is what you would hear at like circuses and stuff like
yeah,
that.
that was, yeah. They were, I think they were pretty put off by that. They, that's how I know about it being a calliope now, because it's still a point of contention, I think, amongst the members. They didn't care for that added to their
And the
thing.
And the other controversial part of this track is that they got a ghost guitar player on it, allegedly.
Yeah,
Dick Wagner.
See, I was going to bring that up. Let's go into Sweet Pain here, because then we can talk
ties
more
into
about
both of them.
Dick Wagner. Because the question is like, okay, there's not a lot to be said about Sweet Pain. It's although I think the riff is pretty unusual.
Yeah, it's all those guitars on top of it. Like I heard it was supposed to be a take on.
And I'm like, that's like not something they had ever done. So we know now that Dick Wagner was brought in to play lead guitar on this because Ace allegedly wasn't available. Blah blah blah. Whatever whatever
Poker game.
Yeah,
now we've got the
whatever.
Destroyer revisited Redux, whatever it is. And it's got the quote-unquote lost Ace solo, which I think is really not even intended to be a legit solo. I think it was probably him working an idea, because that's how he did his thing.
So I did my own personal research on that.
Okay, go for it.
I actually grabbed that MP3 track. I put it in my multi-track recorder, and I lined up the beginning of the solo because it loops. He basically goes through that version of the solo twice. I lined them up perfectly in the sound editor, and I played them back. It's the exact same thing. So they only grabbed half of an idea of a solo and looped it. It's the exact same guitar track played twice. Yeah, they just copied and pasted it in twice.
I got you.
So that I 100% agree and believe with what you're saying. I think they just pulled out a demo. They pulled out a scratch track, something that Ace was just messing around with, not even close to a finished idea, and went, oh, well, this is at least an Ace. Ace played these notes. We'll put it on here.
Well, he brought in Dick Wagner to finish it for whatever reason. But and do we need to discuss Dick Wagner and his history?
I mean, he was one of Bob's go-to guys at this time.
Dick Wagner had been in a band called The Frost in Detroit, and was part of, again, that Michigan thing. There's so much that came out of Michigan in that late 60s, early 70s. And was he had partnered with Steve Hunter, who had played in Mitch Ryder's Detroit. And they ended up playing, they're the guys that are playing on Lou Reed's Rock and Roll Animal album, the live album. And then all those guys transitioned over to become the new Alice Cooper band when Alice went solo. And if you have the Welcome to My Nightmare concert film, there's the famous guitar duel between Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter. So, and then...
Criminally overlooked players, in my opinion,
they
too.
They were used in a lot of different aspects. The live version, quote-unquote live version of Train Kept A Rollin' by Aerosmith.
Yeah.
The trade-off leads on that with Brad Whitford and Joe Perry? Nope. Steve Hunter and Dick Wagner. Ghosting. They don't get credit, but that's who it is.
And they would continue to work with Bob on a bunch of things, like Peter Gabriel's first solo album.
Yeah. He was their go-to guy, and Dick Wagner particularly had a lot of influence in songwriting on the Welcome to My Nightmare album for Alice. He wrote Only Women Bleed, and now it's escaping me. Escape? No, it's not escape.
But I think it's also important to note, though, one of the reasons we were bringing up, that not being a finished Ace solo is one of the things that we do hear from the Kiss camp over Arc, is that Ace tried to do solos on it and it just wasn't working.
Well,
so
no,
they had
to bring.
They were wanting to bring him back in to redo it, and that's when he was saying no. Okay. He's like, yeah, they wanted him to come back in and do more. That may well be true. That may be it. Who knows? Right, but that's not the representation of what we heard.
What's interesting to me is, like, for all the time and effort that he's putting into all this stuff, and he's intricately working out all the details and stuff, somehow he has enough trust to be able to make a phone call and say, hey, why don't you come over and put on some guitar? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
In and out.
And it's like, wait a minute. All this time you're spending, and all this guy's got to do is come in and go, done.
Yeah.
That's kind of how Bob ran, too. It's like, time is money.
But it kind of shows, in a way, it kind of shows a differentiation of how much trust he has in their musical abilities.
Well, from day one, he was always saying, Kiss didn't know anything. I had to teach them how to tune their guitars.
Well, that's
of course a stretch. Yeah. But that's hearing him say that does at least put the perspective of how he saw them. If he's, throwing the jab of, I had to teach them how to tune their guitars, he clearly did not respect them as musicians at all. So he would just immediately
be like... But he respected them as songwriters.
As songwriters,
He understood that they were Kiss. He understood what I like about them is that they weren't, skilled musicians, quote unquote. They played largely by feel. They had an energy and an excitement about them, and we'll get into this when the album comes out, because a lot of people feels like Bob Ezrin squeezed all that energy and excitement out and made this very cold, dense,
not a Kiss record in their eyes,
not a Kiss record
or ears.
But the irony, of course, is it becomes in a way the definitive Kiss album. What's interesting? Here's a question. Okay, so we know Dick Wagner's in, and this goes back to what you were talking about with Flamin' Youth. We know he's in on Sweet Pain
for sure. Yeah.
What else has he played on this? Because I started listening to this with a new ear once I got to thinking about it. Flamin' Youth sounds like it could be him.
I've heard rumors of that, which is why I was kind of turned to him and agreed.
He says he plays on 3 songs, and I think one of them he claims is Shouted Out Loud. I think he's on 4 songs.
I'm trying to think of like all the solo parts on all of the...
It's debated that he's playing the atonal stuff on... I don't know if atonal is the right word, but the kind of dissonance on God of Thunder. Because it's kind of in a way... But, people are like, well, Ace can do that too. And it wasn't like it was anything... it was more of a feel that they were achieving.
Yeah, and they're probably putting layers and things like that too, and with like different guitar tones. And I'm sure Ace wasn't around for all those either.
I'm wondering if Ace even plays lead on Detroit Rock City. Whoa! Well, I'll tell you what. You know what? We're running hard here, and this looks like it's going to have to be a 2-parter because there's just so much to mine out of this. So we're going to stop here, and hopefully you'll join us for a second episode as we really do our deep dive into Destroyer. So for this part 1, I guess now, as it will be, I'm Russ Ward, and for Cap Nunn and Alex Stiff, please join us for part 2 of No Time to Turn.
Thank you for listening. Please insert another coin by supporting the show for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/somethinggoodnetwork.